Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide.
Hi, preschool peeps.
Hi, peeps.
So here we are in January, well into a school year, and school systems and early childhood programs have had the opportunity to kind of figure things out and iron things out. Especially, it's hard these days in the beginning of a school year. Hiring is very hard. There's also money that's being thrown at public school systems for early education, and they don't necessarily have everything they need right away, but they've gotten the grant money, so they have to set up more classrooms, or they want to. That's why they've gotten the grant money. They want to set up more classrooms. And now here we are in January, and I feel like things should be a little more settled, but that's not necessarily what we're encountering in our early childhood settings. Because in some cases, the administrators of either private programs for early learners or public school programs for early learners do not have a background in early education. So that makes it a little hard for them to understand how curriculum works with young children like preschool age differently than children who are first, second, third grade, because they're at a different stage of development, right? Makes them hard to understand adjustments that may need to be made if you're in a school that has children that go through the elementary school years, if you're that sort of administrator. And again, that can be public or private. I've worked with private preschool programs where they're also a part of a larger school system where they have older children, and the administrators struggle to understand what the 3-year-old classes, the 4-year-old classes, younger if you have them, what they should look like versus second grade, third grade, fourth grade. And I want to be clear that it's not just public school administrators who are challenged by this extra dump of money, and now they have to figure out how to put preschool classes in there. But I know in our state, and it may be true for wherever you are, there are different roles that people play in private child care centers, formerly known as daycares, but we really should call child care. In these child care settings where we are, the director of the program does not need to have an early education degree. There are other people who should have the early education degree. You're supposed to have at least a head teacher and perhaps a director who is also the head teacher who has an education in early ed. But that doesn't mean that the owner or the director, who really is the overall supervisor, is going to adhere to what these people say. So I think there's always been this struggle. If you have an administrator, whether they're called director or principal or vice principal or assistant director, if they don't have the education in early education, there's a lot of struggle that takes place. And these days, public school here in the United States has a lot of requirements of our teachers, but it's not the same in private programs. And these days, when everyone is so short-staffed, the private programs are doing the best they can to hire qualified people, but they're not always people who have degrees or advanced degrees in early education. Sometimes they have credentials where they didn't need to go and get that longer 4-year degree, let's say. And I also before Alison kind of adds to this, I just want to say this. I understand that a degree in something doesn't make you proficient at applying the knowledge. I completely understand that. There are people who have credentials, even other degrees, who come into these programs and these schools, and they are just naturals at this. They are so good at working with young children, can follow a curriculum. There are people who have advanced degrees who, they can't think themselves out of a paper bag. They just can't, they can't take this stuff and apply it. I get that. So if you're listening to this thinking, I don't have that degree, but I'm really good at what I do, that's entirely possible. The
Yeah.
problem we're having in our society, though, is that there are people like you who are really good at it, who have administrators who don't have the education or understanding of what to do or acknowledge that you're good at it. And then we also have people who have received degrees in early education who are working for administrators who have no clue. So they'll say this is how it's supposed to be in early ed. And the administrator is like, no, that's not how we do it here. It's becoming a real gap in understanding, I think.
I agree with that. And I don't necessarily, especially with the adding with the grants to the public school, I don't know if that's really anybody's fault necessarily, like, because the administrator is probably a wonderful administrator when doing K-5, right? And then they win this grant, and then suddenly now they're in charge of preschool students, and they've never had to do that before. So there's like this learning curve, right? But like, get them the training that they need in order to know how early childhood works.
Right. And you know, the same can be true of directors. Same can be true of directors, right? So they also, like I said, where we are, and likely where some of you are, the person called director or the person called owner of a childcare center doesn't need to have that background. But I'm going to submit that they should. They should be required to do certain things or to get certain credentials. And they may be wonderful at running a business. They may have wonderful staff policies. They may have great relationships with the families. They may do beautiful things with a budget. They might get the children lots of things, but early education is not only about the things. It's about an understanding of the development of young children and how their learning should be approached. You know, for example, children now, we have a lot of programs they're in that are kind of inquiry based. Children are curious about things. They're showing us what they're curious about. We're supposed to follow their lead. And then an administrator comes along and says, well, enough of that topic. But see, the children are still interested. And maybe they don't value that because they don't understand the value of that. That children in this age become fully engaged in the things that capture their interest, period, the end.
Right. Yes. Because I think when you're used to dealing with older children, that's the way that goes. Like, I remember even when I taught kindergarten, it was like, okay, here's your math curriculum. We're going to follow this. You know, it's going to go from adding and then subtracting, and there's an order to things, and there is no, and then all the other inquiry stuff about math, you would do like maybe on the side, but you had to get through that curriculum, right? And that's the way kind of K-5 or 6-8 or whatever you want to talk about. That's how that goes, right? But with early childhood, it's so much about like following the children. You know, like, but when you're teaching third grade, you're not going to necessarily follow the children for every subject, right? You might do that for science, maybe, but you're not going to be you might do it for social studies, but you're not going to do it for math because there's certain things that have to be done. You're not going to do it for reading because there's certain things that have to be done in order to get them where they need to be. But like, the way we teach children that are younger,
it's different.
It's like a totally different way of thinking, right? And if you're not used to that because you're used to your third grade world or your second grade world, it's hard to wrap your head around it. Just like me as an early childhood person, it's sometimes hard. Like if they put me in third grade, I'd be like, I don't know how do I get my inquiry based like way of teaching into third grade? It's a different way. It's, you know, and so like you have these administrators who are K-5 certified, or I don't even know how the certifications go in admin, but like, and now all of a sudden they have these little preschoolers who it is very much inquiry based, curiosity based, you know, project based, you know, and they're trying to shove what should be project based and inquiry based into their old box. Okay. And it doesn't work that way. You have to get rid of your box, you know, and really,
but you can't get rid of your box. You can't get rid of your box unless you know. Like what's that saying?
They don't know to get rid of the box.
What do people say, Alison? If you know, you know. And if you don't know, you don't know. Right?
And
if you know, if you know about early learners, you know. And if you don't know, no one can expect you to know. These grants that are coming out, grants having to do with whether it's quality rating and improvement systems, public school for early childhood, all this money that's flowing and all these different things that they have to help beef up programs are great. But honestly, none of it's going to matter if the programs and the public schools are not required to ensure that all administrators have an understanding of early education. And we have to advocate for that. That is not necessarily going to happen where you are unless two sets of people stand together and say, here's what's needed to have what these children need. And those two sets of people who need to stand together are the families and the teachers. They need to come together and say, there needs to be a requirement for admins to have some sort of background or education in early education. I work with some public school systems who have purposely set up an early education infrastructure. And it probably happened when their administrators realized, we don't know what we're doing here. We have to hire people who know what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So they came there are these positions. There's like the early education supervisor, the early education director, and that person should have an early education degree of some kind. It shouldn't be somebody that you took from a fourth grade classroom and said, you're going to be in charge of early ed now. It can't be that.
Right.
It needs to be a genuine early educator who's got a background in it. And I can tell you as a former director, I had to attend in our state again. I had to attend something called the Directors Academy, where we learned about directing an early childhood program, and we did learn some child development, but it wasn't enough. It was not the same. It wasn't enough as what administrators really need to understand. How do we help these children progress? And when children are deeply learning in the way that they need, they are more likely to progress. And when they progress, the families tell other families, and the families say, you wouldn't believe how wonderful my child's early childhood was. It doesn't look like worksheets and flashcards and kill and drill. That's not what early childhood looks like. And if that's what's going on, then what you have, folks, is an administrator who doesn't know early ed. That's what you have. And your children are spending a whole bunch of time memorizing things that they can't necessarily apply or fully understand.
Yeah. And so you talk about directors going to the Directors Academy, at least in our state. I worked at a childcare center once, a long, long time ago, where the owner of the business had no background in education at all. He just wanted to open up a business, and he thought it would be the easiest business to open because, it's basically a 9-to-5 kind of thing, and he didn't have to work on the weekends because his original goal was to open a restaurant, but that would be too long of hours. And so you have people like that who are like, and I'm not kidding, that is a true story. Okay. He originally wanted to open a restaurant, but the hours would be too long. So he opened up a childcare center instead. And you have a lot of these private centers that are proprietary, right? Where they can kind of buy in and get their own location. And that's what he did. He had no clue. Could he run a budget? Absolutely. He knew how to run a business. Absolutely. He did not know anything about education whatsoever.
Okay.
So then
I want
employees who were teachers because he didn't know. Okay.
They don't know.
And it was that easy. That happens too. Know?
I one time worked for an early education program. It was bought by someone. This is again a long time ago, kind of like Alison. It was the owner sold, right? And the owner who sold didn't necessarily have a background in early ed, but was very happy to just let the director do their thing. And the owner didn't have a background, but the director did. And he was perfectly happy letting the director run the educational part of the program because he knew he didn't know that. And so things were great. And then somebody else bought this program, and this person ended up in a political career. This person did this to build a base for a political career. This was not out of any sort of understanding or love of children. And this person ran a business like you would run, like you would micromanage in a corporation, which is, you can't really micromanage early education either. So it changed the entire atmosphere, everything, the ether in the room, everything changed when this person took over. As teachers who may be listening to us, professionals, teachers, teacher assistants, paraprofessionals, parents, families, legal guardians, Whyever you're listening to us, we need to stand much firmer and louder on all of this money is great, and all of these quality rating systems and rating scales and all these things, they're wonderful. They help us to understand high quality, but none of it matters if you're not insisting that the administrators truly understand early education.
Yep.
If we don't stand for that,
Absolutely.
folks, none of the rest is going to matter.
Right.
To your children.
And I
to
think in some instances, it's a safety issue, right? Like, because I feel like it's not necessarily just the stuff that's happening in individual classrooms. Like, if you're trying to do preschool and you have many preschool classrooms and you're trying to fit them into like the way recess works for K-5, that's not the same. You know, like, you shouldn't be having hundreds of preschool students all trying to use the same equipment outside, right? That might work for K-5 when they have the large field and they can manage themselves a little bit more. They're a little bit more self-sufficient. Preschool, no, like that's not going to work, you know? Like, so I feel like, and that can become a safety issue too. You know, not having the proper equipment in your school could become a safety issue, you know?
Yeah.
And so I feel like, and that might just be something like one of those, like, if you don't know, you don't know kind of thing, you know, like not knowing what little children need to be safe at a school, or to even like using the proper bathrooms, you know, like those kind of things. Like, if you don't know, you don't know. So listen to your teachers if you're an administrator who do know, you know, like, hey, if you need something in your classroom to make it safer for the children, then you need to ask for it and advocate for it.
Right. So don't you think then, Alison, that the question is then this: let's say you are someone working in a program, in a public school, in a private school, where you know the administrator has no background and things are being done that you realize should be done a little differently. I think the question is, how do you approach that? You know, our ethical code tells us that if you have a problem with somebody, you have to go to them first. You don't just go to a higher authority, whoever that might be. You go to them first.
Right.
So I think that it's worthwhile to very gently and respectfully say to people something like, I attended a professional development session and it was really great. Here's what they taught us. Can we try it? Or to go to someone and say, I listened to this podcast or several podcasts that are about excellence in early education and for young children. And they had this idea, and I think the children would really flourish. Can I try it and see if you can just pilot something in your own space? Sometimes a big system change scares administrators, but when you go to administrators and you say,
changes can't be done right away either.
Right, that's
you
true.
Know, like,
so if you go and you say, in my space with my students, can I just try this and let you know how it goes? Maybe we can help to bring in some of those changes. And, you know, as I'm a former program director, there were definitely things that my staff brought to me and I said, try it, let me know, try it, let me know how it goes. Because education is an always evolving thing, but you have to go with proof from somebody else, whether it's a scholarly website, not just Joe Schmo putting stuff on there about early ed. It's got to be something that's through a reputable site like the National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC.org, 0to3.org, you know, those sorts of organizations. And they do put out lots of information about what you need and developmentally appropriate practice. If you have someone's book, that's always considered a reputable source, especially in the world of publishing. If it's published by a traditional publisher, sometimes people who have no education about it will pay attention. You know, if you can bring things and say, look at this, or even things from your curriculum and say, the curriculum says this, and I would like to try it. Not just look what the curriculum says, and we're not doing that. You can try, like, the curriculum says this, I read this in the curriculum, and I would like to try it. Can I have a few weeks to try this and let you know how it goes? I think that's far more palatable to administrators than going in and saying, we're doing it all wrong. We're doing it all wrong, and everybody has to change. Even saying something to them like, I'm doing it this way because this is what no, we need to go and respectfully say, this is what I learned. This is what I've read. Here it is. I can share it with you. And I would like to give that a shot in my room. And hopefully you work in a space where there's enough freedom and teacher autonomy, teacher independence, where they will say to you, all right, give it a shot, let me know. And then it can snowball from there.
In my experience, most administrators love when you take the initiative to do something like this. And it might be you're the only classroom that's now doing whatever it is because you said, hey, the curriculum says this and I'd really like to try it. So now you might be a little almost like going rogue, but not, because the curriculum says it, but like your classroom might be doing something different than other classrooms, and that's perfectly okay. And then once the administrator says, oh, well, that does seem to work in Allison's room, we can give the freedom to the other teachers now if they want it, and then it spreads because then because the administrator really doesn't know, right? So like, it's almost like you have to teach them by showing them, I feel. And I've never met an administrator who where you come to them and say something like the way Cindy said it, like, hey, I've seen this in the curriculum, I'd like to try this, in my own space. I've never seen anybody say no, because they like when you have, usually if you have a good administrator, they like when you have taken the time to research the curriculum or research on your own.
Yeah.
Hey, I was on the NACI website and I saw this and I'd like to try it. Hey, I was listening to a podcast and they had this great idea, I'd like to try it. They love that kind of stuff. It shows that you have initiative, and it shows that you're interested in making things work and improve, even if it is within your own space.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Approach it properly. Yeah.
Hopefully so. And the bottom line is always the children for me. The children need us to be providing them with education in the way that they should be getting it at the age they're at. They are somebody today. They're going to be, hopefully they will all become first, second, third, fourth, fifth graders someday, but they're not that today. So we have to think about, how do we actually approach these young children? And then how do we approach two things? The administrators who might not have so much experience with this age group, whatever sort of setting you're in. And then how do we approach the larger systems? Because nothing changes without advocacy. You have to stand up and say things, whether it's to a board of education or a parent or a board that runs your program, or I don't know, you have to say things to the state and say, hey, here's what's lacking in early education. And you never know whose ear you're going to catch or whose eye you're going to catch on that sort of thing. It's worth doing. It's absolutely worth doing. So hopefully you'll be thinking about that. And even, again, more than anything, to go and say, here's something that's in our curriculum or as we were taught to do. Can I try it in my room? But it can't be something that's not developmentally appropriate. You're going to find articles online that all over the place that tell you to do things that are not age and developmentally appropriate for this age group. It's got to be through reputable places like, or organizations like NACI and 0 to 3, those sorts of organizations. Teaching Strategies, who puts out the creative curriculum, High Scope, who puts out that curriculum. Those two are also very reputable and developmentally appropriate. Ideas that you can get from reading about approaches to learning like Montessori, Reggio Emilia, those sorts of approaches are very developmentally appropriate. So go and look into all these teaching approaches and see what tiny little nuggets of ideas you can bring back to move the program just tiny little steps at a time into the right direction. And families, you can do that too. If you're listening and you're a family member, you can go and say, I was reading things about Reggio Emilia and it sounds really intriguing how they incorporate creativity and the arts. I would love to give you some information about it to see if there's a way to include it in our children's program. That just shows how interested you are in what your children are doing. And, as an administrator, I have to tell you, I'd be sitting there saying, great, they're probably talking to the other families about it. I'd better read this. Right?
Families like to talk.
I would be absolutely like, I better take a look at this because it's going to spread like wildfire. Families don't always realize the power they have in all early childhood settings. They feel powerless because it's like an institutional organization, but you have a lot of power. So
you have a lot of power.
Use it in good and respectful ways, and your children will get further.
Right.
You know? Okay. I feel like the quote for today's episode is when you know, you know.
When you know, you know.
When you know,
I
you
feel like
know.
it's one of those, like, the more you know.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely.
Yeah.
It's one of those
Yeah.
quotes. So
Yeah.
folks, if you have a related story, feel free to contact us. You can find us on Facebook, the How Preschool Teachers Do It podcast page. You can also go to our website, howpreschoolteachersdoit.com. Send us
Yep.
some feedback
Send
and
us something.
information. We love
Yep.
it. And if we don't get back to you right away, just know we do read them all, and we do
Yes.
consider them all for episodes and information you
Yeah.
send us. And also, okay, folks, we're going to sign off on that note, and we will catch you again next week with another brand new episode of How Preschool Teachers Do It. See you then.
Yeah. Bye, peeps.